Ambassador Vela stood at the observation window of her ship, the whisper of calculation, and watched the small blue planet rotate slowly in the darkness of space. She had been doing this job for 200 years. She had met hundreds of new species. She had welcomed them all into the galactic concord with the same speech, the same smile, the same promise of peace and prosperity. But this time was different. This time, something was very wrong. Run the scans again, she ordered her science officer, a tall creature with 4 arms and skin like polished stone. Ambassador, we have run them 17 times. The results do not change. Vela pressed her thin fingers against the cold glass. Down there, on that unremarkable world, orbiting an unremarkable star, lived a species that should not exist, a species that broke every rule the galaxy had ever known. They called themselves humans. The Galactic Concord had been studying life across the Milky Way for over 50,000 years. In that time, they had catalogued more than 12,000 intelligent species. Every single one of them had followed the same path of development. First, a species would learn to use energy. Then they would discover how to fold space. Then, if they were unlucky enough to evolve on a violent world, they might develop simple weapons. This was the natural order. This was how the universe worked. You learned to teleport before you learned to fight. Because teleportation was simply easier to discover. The mathematics of space folding were elegant and natural. Any species smart enough to look at the stars would eventually figure it out. Weapons, on the other hand, required a special kind of thinking, a dark kind of thinking. The Concord had only encountered a few species that had developed weapons at all, and those species had done so long after they had already mastered teleportation. But humans had done the opposite. Humans had developed weapons first, weapons of terrifying power and brutal simplicity, and they had done it without any understanding of dimensional physics at all. Show me the military analysis again, Vela said. The science officer waved one of his hands, and a holographic display appeared in the air. It showed a human warship, ugly and angular, covered in thick plates of metal armor, and mounted along its spine were a series of long tubes that made Vela's stomach twist with an ancient fear she did not understand. They call them railguns, the science officer explained. The concept is remarkably primitive. 2 magnetic rails accelerate a metal projectile to extreme velocities. The projectiles leave the weapon at approximately 3% of light speed. Vela did the math in her head. 3% of light speed. That was 9,000 kilometers per second. A small piece of metal, traveling at that speed, would carry more energy than a nuclear explosion. That is impossible, she whispered. No species develops kinetic weapons before teleportation. The energy requirements alone would make it impractical. And yet, they have done it. They have mounted these weapons on their ships, their vehicles, and their orbital platforms. They have thousands of them. Vela turned away from the window. She needed to think. She needed to understand how this had happened. Her species, the Thessians, had been one of the first to develop teleportation. They had used it to share food and resources across their world. They had used it to end poverty and suffering. When they finally reached the stars, they had found other species who had done the same thing. The Galactic Concord was built on the simple truth that teleportation made war pointless. Why fight over territory when you could teleport anywhere? Why build walls when anyone could simply appear on the other side? For 50,000 years, this truth had held. There had been conflicts, of course. Some species were aggressive, some were territorial, but the Concord had always been able to contain them, because everyone had the same basic technology. Everyone was equally vulnerable, but humans were not equally vulnerable. Humans had built their entire civilization around the idea that they might need to defend themselves. They had walls, they had bunkers, they had weapons that did not care about shields or teleportation or any of the things the Concord used to maintain peace. I need to speak with them, Vela said finally. Prepare a diplomatic shuttle. The science officer hesitated. Ambassador, I do not think that is wise. We do not know what they will do. They have already detected our presence. Their weapons platforms are tracking our ship. I am aware of that. But we cannot simply observe them forever. We need to understand them. We need to know why they evolved this way. The shuttle ride down to the planet's surface took only a few minutes. Vela could have teleported directly, but she wanted the humans to see her approach. She wanted them to know she was coming in peace. The landing site was a large concrete platform surrounded by military vehicles. Humans stood in neat rows, wearing identical gray uniforms and holding small weapons in their hands. Personal railguns, Vela realized. Even their individual soldiers carried weapons that could punch through starship armor. A single human stepped forward. He was tall for his species, with gray hair and a face marked by age and experience. He wore more decorations on his uniform than the others, which Vela assumed meant he was important. "I am General Marcus Chen," the human said. His voice was deep and calm. "Welcome to Earth." Vela bowed in the traditional Thessian manner. "I am Ambassador Vela of the Galactic Concord. I come in peace." The general did not smile. "That remains to be seen." They walked together through a large building filled with humans and machines. Vela noticed that every doorway had guards, every corridor had cameras, every room had weapons mounted on the walls. These people lived in a state of constant readiness for violence. "Your species is very different from the others we have encountered," Vela said carefully. "Is that a problem?" "It is unusual. Most species develop teleportation before they develop weapons. You have done the opposite." General Chen stopped walking. He turned to face her, and Vela saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something older and deeper, something that spoke of thousands of years of struggle and survival. "Ambassador, do you know what Earth is like? Do you know what we had to survive to get here?" "I have read the reports. Your planet has extreme temperature variations, dangerous predators, and frequent natural disasters. That is a polite way of putting it. Our planet tried to kill us every single day. Ice ages, volcanoes, plagues, predators that hunted us in the dark. We did not have time to develop elegant technologies. We needed weapons to survive. We needed walls to protect our families. We needed to be ready to fight at all times." He started walking again, and Vela followed. "When we finally looked up at the stars," General Chen continued, "we did not see wonder and opportunity. We saw more darkness, more unknown threats, more reasons to prepare." They entered a large room filled with screens showing images of space. Human warships patrolled the solar system. Orbital platforms armed with railguns watched every approach. Humanity had turned their entire star system into a fortress. "You think we are primitive," the general said. "You think we evolved wrong. But I think you are the ones who made a mistake." "What do you mean?" "You built your civilization on the assumption that peace is natural, that cooperation is automatic, that no one would ever truly want to hurt you." He pointed at the screens. "We built ours on the assumption that somewhere out there, something wants us dead, and we intend to be ready when it arrives." Vela looked at the weapons, the ships, the soldiers. She thought about her peaceful Concord, its teleportation networks and its diplomatic councils, and she wondered, for the first time in 200 years, if the humans might be right. "I need to make a report to my superiors," she said quietly. "Of course. What will you tell them?" Vela considered the question for a long moment. Then she spoke the words that would change the galaxy forever. "I will tell them that humanity evolved backwards, and I will recommend that we keep a very close eye on you." General Chen smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "We would expect nothing less." The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. A primitive species had been discovered, a species that could not teleport but had somehow built weapons of terrible power. The Galactic Concord held emergency meetings in 100 different languages on 1,000 different worlds, and the conclusion was always the same. Humanity was a threat. Humanity had to be contained. Commander Marcus Chen, son of the general who had first met Ambassador Vela 20 years earlier, stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance and watched the alien fleet surround Earth. 47 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, each one carrying weapons that could bypass any physical defense. "They are hailing us," said Lieutenant Rodriguez, the communications officer. "Put them through." The main screen flickered, and Ambassador Vela appeared. She looked older now, but her eyes were just as sharp as the photos from his father's files. "Commander Chen," she said, "the Galactic Concord has determined that your species represents a danger to galactic peace. You have 30 standard hours to dismantle all weapons platforms and surrender all military vessels. If you do not comply, we will be forced to take action." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "What kind of action?" "We will neutralize your species." "You mean you will kill us all?" The ambassador did not answer, but her silence said everything. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Marcus asked. Your ships are impressive, but our railguns can punch through your hulls like paper. We have proven this in simulations. You have proven nothing. Your weapons are crude and slow. Our teleportation technology allows us to bypass any defense you can imagine. We can transport explosives directly into your cities. We can remove the air from your ships. We can tear your planet apart without ever coming within range of your primitive cannons. Marcus nodded slowly. She was right, of course. Teleportation was the ultimate weapon. It made walls meaningless. It made distance irrelevant. There was no way to defend against an enemy that could simply appear wherever they wanted, unless you changed the rules. Lieutenant Rodriguez, activate Protocol Faraday. Rodriguez hesitated for only a moment, then pressed a series of buttons on her console. Across the solar system, thousands of satellites came online. They formed a web of electromagnetic energy that surrounded Earth in a shell of invisible power. On the view screen, Ambassador Vela frowned. What are you doing? Your teleportation technology relies on dimensional folding. It requires precise calculations and stable energy fields. Our scientists have been studying your technology for 2 decades. We know how it works. He pointed at the screen, where the alien fleet was starting to show signs of confusion. Protocol Faraday creates electromagnetic interference on a massive scale. It disrupts the energy patterns needed for teleportation. As long as that net is active, you cannot teleport anything into our system. You cannot bypass our defenses. You have to come through us. Vela's expression changed. For the first time in her long career, she looked uncertain. That is, not possible. No pre-teleportation species has ever developed countermeasures. We are not like other species. We have been preparing for this moment since the day your ship first appeared in our sky. We knew you would come for us eventually. We knew you would try to take away our weapons, and we knew we could not let that happen. The ambassador's eyes hardened. You are making a terrible mistake. The Concord has maintained peace for 50,000 years. We have ended wars. We have saved billions of lives. Your weapons threaten everything we have built. Your peace was built on the assumption that everyone would play by the same rules, that everyone would develop the same technology and reach the same conclusions. But we are different. We had to be different to survive. And now you are afraid of us. We are not afraid. We are concerned. There is a difference. Marcus stood up and walked closer to the screen. No, you are afraid. I can see it in your eyes. You have never faced an enemy you could not simply teleport past. You have never had to fight for your survival. But we have, every day, every generation, for thousands of years. Fighting is in our blood. It is in our bones. It is the only reason we exist at all. He turned to his tactical officer. Lieutenant Park, are the main batteries ready? Yes, Commander. All railgun platforms are online and tracking. Marcus looked back at the ambassador. You have a choice, Vela. You can withdraw your fleet and leave us in peace, or you can stay and find out what happens when you face a species that was born to fight. There was a long silence. The alien ships held their position, their weapons armed but not firing. Marcus could feel the tension on his bridge like a physical weight. Everyone knew what was at stake. Everyone knew that the next few minutes would decide the fate of humanity. Finally, Vela spoke. The Conquered does not negotiate with threats. Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss. He made a signal with his hand, and the Defiance opened fire. The first railgun slug crossed the distance between the human flagship and the nearest alien vessel in less than a second. It struck the ship's energy shield at 9,000 kilometers per second, carrying more kinetic force than a small nuclear weapon. The shield, designed to stop teleported explosives and energy weapons, shattered like glass. The slug continued through the ship's hull, through its engine room, and out the other side. The alien vessel exploded in a ball of white fire. Across the solar system, every human weapon platform fired at once. Thousands of metal projectiles screamed through space, each one a messenger of destruction. The alien fleet, caught completely off guard, had no time to react. 17 ships died in the first minute. The survivors tried to teleport away, but the Faraday net held. They were trapped in a killing field, surrounded by weapons they had never imagined and could not understand. Cease fire, Marcus ordered. The railguns fell silent. The surviving alien ships drifted through clouds of debris, their hulls scarred and their crews terrified. On the view screen, Ambassador Vela stared at him with wide, unbelieving eyes. What have you done? She whispered. We defended ourselves. something your species seems to have forgotten how to do. You have killed thousands. You have started a war that cannot be won. We did not start this war. You came to our home. You threatened our people. You gave us no choice but to fight. Marcus walked back to his chair and sat down. He was tired. He had not slept in 3 days. But he could not show weakness now. The entire galaxy was watching. Take your surviving ships and go, he said. Tell your Concord what happened here. Tell them that humanity will not be contained. We will not be controlled. We will not surrender our right to defend ourselves. Vela was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. This is not over, Commander. The Concord has resources you cannot imagine. We will find a way to counter your weapons. We will find a way to bring you into line. Maybe you will. But it will not be today. And it will not be easy. The alien ships began to withdraw, their engines glowing as they limped toward the edge of the system. Marcus watched them go, his heart pounding in his chest. They had won. Against all odds, against the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, humanity had won its first battle. But he knew the ambassador was right. This was not over. The Concord would be back, stronger and smarter, and more determined than ever. Humanity had made an enemy of the entire galaxy. And yet, as Marcus looked around at his bridge crew, at their proud faces and steady hands, he felt something that surprised him. Not fear, not regret, hope. They had proven that humans could stand against any enemy, no matter how powerful. They had proven that the universe was not as simple as the Concord believed, and they had proven, once and for all, that evolution was not a straight line. Sometimes, the species that survived was not the one that developed the most elegant technology. Sometimes, it was the one that learned to fight first and ask questions later. The galaxy would never be the same. The video of the battle played on every screen on every world in the Galactic Concord. Billions of beings watched in horror as human weapons tore through the most advanced fleet in the galaxy. They watched ships explode like fireworks. They watched survivors flee in panic. They watched everything they believed about the universe collapse in a matter of minutes. Dr. Athon was one of those viewers. He was a xenopsychologist, an expert in understanding how different species thought and behaved. He had spent his entire career studying the minds of 1,000 different races, but he had never seen anything like humans. He applied for permission to visit Earth the same day the battle ended. Most of his colleagues thought he was insane. Earth was a war zone, they said. Humans were dangerous animals who would kill him on sight, but Athon did not believe that. The battle had shown him something that everyone else had missed. The humans had stopped firing. They had destroyed 17 ships in the first minute. They could have destroyed them all. But instead, they had ceased fire and allowed the survivors to leave. That was not the behavior of mindless killers. That was the behavior of warriors who understood restraint. Athon wanted to know why. His shuttle landed on Earth 6 months after the battle. The planet was beautiful in a dangerous way, with vast blue oceans and towering mountains and weather that could change from peaceful to deadly in a matter of hours. It was easy to see why the humans had evolved the way they did. This world did not forgive weakness. He was met at the landing site by a young human female with dark hair and serious eyes. She introduced herself as Captain Sarah Kim, and she would be his guide during his stay. "Why did you come here?" she asked as they drove through a large human city. "Most aliens want nothing to do with us." "I am a scientist," Athon replied. "I study minds, and the human mind is the most interesting one I have ever encountered." "Interesting how? Your species should not exist. Every model we have, every theory we have developed over 50,000 years, says that intelligent life follows a predictable path. But you have broken every prediction. I want to understand how." Captain Kim smiled. It was a strange expression, showing her teeth in a way that would be threatening in most species. But Athon had studied enough human records to know it was a sign of friendliness. "Maybe your models were wrong," she said. Over the next several weeks, Athon studied everything he could about human history and psychology. He read their books. He watched their entertainment. He spoke with soldiers and scientists and ordinary citizens, and slowly, a picture began to form in his mind. Humans did not see conflict as something to be avoided. They saw it as something to be managed. Their entire civilization was built around the idea that disagreement was natural and inevitable. They had developed systems for handling conflict at every level, from personal arguments to global wars. They called one of these systems democracy, where different groups competed for power through votes instead of violence. They called another system law, where disputes were settled by neutral judges instead of private revenge. They even had a system for controlled violence, called sports, where humans could satisfy their aggressive instincts without actually hurting each other. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. And it explained everything. The Galactic Concord had always assumed that conflict was a failure of civilization. They believed that sufficiently advanced species would simply stop fighting, because fighting was inefficient and destructive. But humans had taken a different approach. They had accepted that conflict was part of their nature and built systems to channel it in productive directions. This was why they had developed weapons before teleportation. Not because they were stupid or primitive, but because they understood something the Concord had forgotten. Peace was not the absence of conflict. Peace was the successful management of conflict. Athon was still processing this insight when Captain Kim brought him to meet someone important. His name was General Marcus Chen, the same commander who had led the defense of Earth. The general was older than Athon expected, with gray hair and deep lines on his face, but his eyes were sharp and alert, missing nothing. "Dr. Athon," the general said, "I am told you have been studying us." "Yes. Your species is fascinating. Fascinating enough to report back to the Concord, to help them find new ways to destroy us?" Athon felt a moment of fear, but he forced himself to remain calm. "That is not why I am here. I came to understand, not to threaten." The general studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. But you should know that we are preparing for the Concord's next attack. We are building more ships, more weapons, more defenses. Whatever they throw at us, we will be ready." "That is exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. You see, I have learned something during my time here. Something that the Concord needs to hear." "And what is that?" Athon took a deep breath. "The Concord is keeping a secret they have hidden from their own people for 3,000 years. The general leaned forward, suddenly interested. "What kind of secret?" "There is something coming. Something from beyond the edge of the galaxy. Our long-range sensors have been tracking it for centuries. It is a fleet of ships, thousands of them, traveling slowly but steadily toward the Milky Way. Another species. We do not know what they are. We call them the Silence, because they never respond to any communication. They simply move forward, consuming everything in their path. Entire galaxies have gone dark in their wake." General Chen was silent for a long moment. His face showed no emotion, but Athon could see his mind working behind those calm eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" the general asked finally. "Because the Concord has no idea how to stop them. Our teleportation technology does not work against them. Our energy weapons pass through their ships without effect. We have tried everything, and nothing works. And you think our weapons might be different. Your railguns are physical. They accelerate matter to extreme velocities. The Silence have never faced anything like that. It is possible, perhaps even likely, that your primitive weapons are the only thing in the galaxy that can hurt them." The general stood up and walked to the window. Outside, human ships were launching from a nearby spaceport, their engines leaving trails of fire across the sky. "So the Concord tried to destroy us," he said slowly. "And now you are telling me that we might be the only ones who can save you." "Yes. I know it is ironic. I know you have every reason to refuse, but I am asking you anyway, because there is no other choice." General Chen turned back to face him. For a moment, Athon saw something in his eyes that he had seen in many humans during his stay. It was not anger or fear or hatred. It was something much more complex. It was hope. "Tell me everything you know about the Silence," the general said, "and then we will talk about what humanity can do to help." Athon felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had come to Earth as a scientist, seeking to understand a strange and dangerous species. But now he understood something far more important. Humanity was not a threat to the galaxy. Humanity was the galaxy's only hope. The question was whether the Concord would realize that before it was too late. 50 years had passed since the first battle between humanity and the Galactic Concord. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Old enemies had become allies, ancient secrets had been revealed, and humanity had found a purpose that stretched far beyond their small blue planet. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood at the center of the Human Military Advisory Corps headquarters. watching as hundreds of alien officers hurried through the corridors. They came from dozens of different species, each one seeking the same thing: the knowledge of how to fight. The Corps had been established 30 years ago, when the Concord finally accepted that humanity had something valuable to teach. At first, only a handful of species had been willing to learn. The idea of warfare was so foreign to most galactic civilizations that they could barely understand the concepts involved. But as reports about the Silence continued to arrive, as entire star systems went dark at the edge of the galaxy, more and more species began to see the value of human knowledge. They came to Earth seeking training in tactics, strategy, and the ancient human art of war. Admiral Tanaka had seen things during her career that would have seemed impossible when she was young. She had watched peaceful species learn to build fortifications. She had seen gentle scholars transform into capable soldiers. She had witnessed the birth of a new kind of galactic civilization, one that understood that survival sometimes required violence, but not everyone had been willing to learn. "Admiral, we have received another message from the Thessian Collective." Tanaka turned to face her aide, a young officer named Lieutenant Park. "What do they want?" "The same thing as always. They are demanding that we stop training their neighbors. They say our military doctrine is corrupting galactic civilization." Tanaka sighed. The Thessians had been the founders of the original teleportation network. They had been the architects of 50,000 years of galactic peace, and they still refused to accept that their way of doing things might not work against every threat. "Tell them the usual. We respect their position, but we will not stop helping species that ask for our assistance." "Yes, Admiral." She watched the lieutenant leave, then turned back to the main display screen. It showed a map of the galaxy, with red dots marking the locations where the Silence had been detected. The dots formed a slowly advancing line, eating their way toward the core worlds of the Conquered. They had perhaps another 50 years before the Silence arrived. Maybe less. A chime sounded, and Tanaka accepted an incoming communication. The face that appeared on her screen belonged to General Keth, the leader of the Kreth military forces. The Kreth were insectoid beings, standing nearly 3 meters tall with 4 powerful arms and armored skin. They had been one of the first species to seek human training, and they had become humanity's closest allies. "Admiral Tanaka," Keth said, his mandibles clicking in the Kreth equivalent of a smile. "I have news from the front lines. Good news or bad news? Both. Our scouts have made contact with a Silence probe ship. They engaged it using the tactics your people taught us." Tanaka leaned forward. This was the first real combat test of their combined training. "What happened?" "We destroyed it. The kinetic weapons worked exactly as predicted. The Silence ship had no defense against physical projectiles." Relief flooded through Tanaka's body. They had suspected that railgun technology would be effective against the Silence, but suspicion was very different from proof. Now they knew for certain. "That is excellent news, General. What is the bad news?" Keth's expression became serious. "Before we destroyed it, the probe transmitted a signal back toward the main fleet. We believe the Silence now know about us. They know someone in this galaxy can hurt them." Tanaka nodded slowly. This was always going to happen eventually. The Silence would learn about humanity and their weapons. The question was what they would do with that knowledge. How long until the main fleet adjusts their course? Our analysts estimate 6 months. They will come directly for the species that pose the greatest threat, which means they will come for us. For Earth, yes, and for Kreth, and for every species that has adopted human military doctrine. The Silence will try to eliminate the resistance before it can grow strong enough to stop them. Tanaka stood and walked to the window. Outside, human and alien cadets were training together on the parade ground, learning formations and tactics that had been developed over thousands of years of human conflict. They were the future of the galaxy. If the galaxy had a future at all, then we need to be ready, she said. "Contact all allied species. Tell them the waiting is over. The war has begun." Over the next 6 months, the greatest military buildup in galactic history took place. Humans and Kreth and a dozen other species worked together to build warships and weapons platforms and defensive installations. They trained millions of soldiers. They developed new tactics and strategies. They did everything they could to prepare for an enemy that had destroyed entire civilizations without slowing down. The Thessian Collective watched these preparations with horror. They sent diplomat after diplomat to plead with the Alliance to stop. They argued that the weapons being built would destabilize the galaxy forever. even if they succeeded against the silence. They warned that humanity was creating a culture of violence that would never be contained. But the other species no longer listened to the Thessians. They had seen the red dots advancing on the map. They had read the reports from the edge of the galaxy. They knew that the old ways of peace and teleportation would not save them from what was coming. When the silence finally arrived, they came in force. Tanaka was on the bridge of the UNS Perseverance when the first enemy ships appeared on sensors. There were thousands of them, vast, dark shapes that seemed to absorb light itself. They moved in perfect formation, silent and relentless, like a wave of darkness rolling across the stars. "All ships, prepare to engage," she ordered. Her voice was calm and steady, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. The human and Kreeth fleet moved to intercept. They were outnumbered 10-1, but they had advantages the silence had never faced before. They had tactics developed over millennia of human warfare. They had weapons designed to kill in the most efficient way possible. And they had something else. Something that the silence could never understand. They had allies willing to die for each other. The first exchange was brutal. Silence ships advanced in their usual pattern, expecting their enemies to flee or surrender. Instead, they met a wall of railgun fire that shattered their formations and tore holes in their ranks. Dark ships exploded silently in the void, their unknown crews dying without a sound. But the silence learned fast. They adapted their formations, spreading out to minimize the damage from kinetic weapons. They began targeting the railgun platforms specifically, pouring their strange energy weapons into anything that could hurt them. Ships on both sides died by the dozens, then the hundreds. Tanaka watched friends and colleagues disappear from the tactical display, their vessels reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The cost was terrible. The cost was necessary. "Admiral, the Thessian fleet is entering the system." Tanaka looked at the sensor display in surprise. The Thessian collective had refused to participate in the alliance. They had condemned everything humanity had built. Why were they here now? Open a channel. Ambassador Vela's face appeared on the screen. She was ancient now, her skin wrinkled and her movements slow. But her eyes were as sharp as they had been 100 years ago. "Admiral Tanaka," she said, "we have come to help. I thought your people did not believe in warfare. We did not. But we have watched the battle. We have seen your people die to protect species who were once your enemies. We have seen courage and sacrifice and something we had forgotten existed." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "We have seen hope." The Thessian fleet moved to support the alliance. They could not fight directly, but they could use their teleportation technology to evacuate wounded crews and resupply damaged ships. It was not much, but it was enough to turn the tide. The battle lasted for 3 days. When it was over, the Silence fleet had been broken. Not destroyed, not completely, but shattered badly enough that they retreated back into the darkness between galaxies. Admiral Tanaka stood on her bridge, surrounded by exhausted officers and damaged equipment, and watched the enemy flee. They had won, against all odds, against an enemy that had destroyed entire galaxies. They had won. But as she looked at the casualty reports, at the thousands of ships lost and the millions of lives ended, she knew this was only the beginning. The Silence would return. They would adapt. They would come again, stronger and smarter than before, and humanity would be ready for them. The war against the Silence lasted 37 years. It was the longest and most destructive conflict in the history of the Milky Way galaxy. Entire star systems were consumed by the fighting. Species that had existed for millions of years vanished overnight. The comfortable civilization that the Galactic Concord had built over 50,000 years was torn apart and rebuilt in blood and fire. General Marcus Chen, now old and gray, had led humanity through the darkest days of the war. He had watched his own children fight and die on distant battlefields. He had made decisions that sent millions to their deaths. He had carried a weight that few beings in history had ever known, but he had never given up hope. Now he stood on the bridge of the UNS Perseverance, the same ship that Admiral Tanaka had commanded decades ago. Around him, the largest fleet ever assembled waited for his orders. Human ships flew alongside Kreeth warships. Thessian support vessels drifted near defensive platforms built by species that had never imagined violence before humanity taught them. And at the heart of the fleet was something new. Something that had taken 20 years to develop. Something that would change everything. "The weapon is ready, General," said Commander Sarah Kim. She had inherited her mother's dark hair and serious eyes, along with her talent for war. Chen nodded slowly. "Show me." The main view screen displayed a schematic of humanity's greatest achievement. It was a teleportation device, but not like anything the Concorde had ever built. Human scientists had studied the Silence ships for decades, learning their secrets, understanding how they moved through space, and they had discovered something remarkable. The Silence used a different kind of teleportation. It was cruder than the Concorde's elegant dimensional folding, but it was also more powerful. It could move objects across vast distances instantly, without the energy requirements that limited Concorde technology. Human scientists had taken that knowledge and combined it with their own understanding of war. They had built a system that could teleport entire weapon platforms directly into the middle of an enemy fleet. Railguns would appear from nowhere, fire their deadly projectiles, and then vanish before the enemy could respond. It was the ultimate combination of human and alien technology, violence and elegance working together. "The Silence core fleet has been detected," Commander Kim reported. "They are gathering at the edge of the system. Approximately 15,000 ships. And our forces? 8,000 combat vessels, 3,000 support ships, and the new teleportation platforms." Chen studied the display. The odds were still against them. Even with their new technology, victory was far from certain. The Silence had proven themselves adaptable and relentless. They had learned from every battle, adjusted to every tactic, survived every weapon humanity had thrown at them. But humanity had learned too. They had learned that survival was not about being the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced. It was about being the most determined. It was about refusing to give up, no matter how dark things seemed. "Begin the attack," Chen ordered. The fleet surged forward, engines blazing with power. Human and Kreeth warships led the assault, their railguns already charging for the first volley. Behind them, the new teleportation platforms powered up, their alien technology humming with barely contained energy. The Silence responded with their usual pattern. Thousands of dark ships moved to intercept, their strange weapons already firing, space filled with deadly energy, cutting through shields and armor like they were not there. Ships began to die on both sides. Chen watched the casualty reports scroll across his screen, names and numbers representing lives that would never see another sunrise. It was the cost of war. It was the price of survival. "Teleportation platforms are in position," Commander Kim announced. "Ready to deploy on your order." Chen took a deep breath. This was the moment everything had been building toward. A century of conflict, billions of lives lost, the entire future of the galaxy hanging in the balance. "Deploy." Across the battlefield, 17,000 railgun platforms appeared in the heart of the Silence fleet. They materialized without warning, bypassing every defense, appearing exactly where they would do the most damage, and then they fired. The destruction was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Railgun slugs tore through Silence ships by the hundreds. The enemy fleet, caught completely by surprise, had no time to react. Their formations shattered. Their ships exploded. Their millennia of conquest came to an end in 9 hours of absolute devastation. When it was over, not a single Silence ship remained. The darkness that had threatened to consume the entire galaxy had been pushed back into the void from which it came. Chen stood on his bridge, surrounded by the sounds of celebration and relief. Officers were hugging each other. Some were crying. Others were simply staring at the sensor displays, unable to believe what they were seeing. "We won," Commander Kim said softly. "We actually won." Chen nodded, but he did not celebrate. He was thinking about all the lives lost, all the sacrifices made, all the species that had been destroyed before humanity could save them. Victory came with a heavy price. "What happens now?" Kim asked. "Now we rebuild. Now we create something new. Something better than what came before." The weeks and months after the final battle were a time of transformation. The old Galactic Concorde was gone, shattered by war and its own inability to adapt. In its place, a new organization was born. They called it the Second Concorde, and it was built on very different principles. The Second Concorde did not assume that peace was natural. It recognized that conflict was part of existence, and that true peace required the strength to defend it. Every member species was expected to contribute to collective defense. Every world had weapons and soldiers ready to fight if necessary. But the Second Concorde also remembered the lessons of human history. It remembered that former enemies could become allies, It remembered that mercy was sometimes more powerful than violence. It remembered that the goal was not war, but the prevention of war. Humanity did not rule this new organization. They refused the offer, choosing instead to serve as advisors and teachers. They had seen what happened when power became concentrated in a single species. They had no desire to repeat the mistakes of the old Concord. General Chen retired after the war, spending his final years on a small farm far from the centers of power. He grew vegetables and watched sunsets and tried to forget the terrible things he had done and seen. He died peacefully, surrounded by family, at the age of 112. A statue was built in his honor at the center of the Second Concord's capital. It showed him as he had been during the war, stern and determined and unbreakable. At the base of the statue were words that captured everything humanity had taught the galaxy. Strength is the guardian of peace. Peace is the purpose of strength. Ambassador Vela gave the final address at the statue's dedication. She was the oldest living member of her species now, her body frail and her voice weak, but her mind was still sharp, and her words carried across the silent crowd of thousands. "We thought they were primitive," she said. "We thought they had evolved wrong. We believed that our elegant technology and our peaceful civilization made us superior. But we were the ones who had forgotten something essential." She paused, her ancient eyes sweeping across the crowd. Representatives from 100 species stood before her, all of them transformed by a century of war and alliance with humanity. The universe is not kind. It does not care about elegance or civilization or peaceful intentions. It only cares about one thing: survival. Humanity understood this truth from the beginning. They built their entire civilization around it, and when the darkness came, they were the only ones ready to fight. She bowed toward the statue, a gesture her species reserved for those they considered equals, or perhaps for those they considered greater than themselves. Humanity taught us how to survive. They taught us that peace must be protected. They taught us that strength and mercy can exist together. And for that, we owe them everything. The crowd remained silent as the old ambassador walked slowly away from the podium. Then, one by one, they began to applaud. Humans and Kreth, Thessians and a dozen other species, former enemies and new allies, all of them united by the lessons of a small blue planet and the stubborn species that had refused to give up. High above the ceremony, in the darkness between stars, a human patrol ship watched over the gathering. Its weapons were powered down, but they were ready at a moment's notice. Just in case, because that was what humanity had learned over thousands of years of struggle. Peace was precious. Peace was worth fighting for. And peace required eternal vigilance. The galaxy had changed forever. And at the heart of that change was a simple truth that had guided humanity since the beginning of their existence. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and never, ever stop fighting for those you love.